In this video, you're going to get introduced to the file system module or the FS module in Node.js. So this is a built-in module which you can use to manage files and folders. So you can do things like reading files, writing into files, creating files or folders, and deleting them, and so many other operations. So to start, I'm going to have a list of files inside our folders, which we will manipulate using the FS module. So following is the structure of the lecture to make things easy for you. So to start, we're gonna look at the synchronous way of doing things. So this means that we're gonna be writing code which is blocking. So when you write blocking code in JavaScript, then JavaScript does not move to the next line until the current one is executed. So let's go ahead and start writing code and manipulate these files. So first of all, we will need to use the FS module. So we need to require FS. So I'm going to create a constant, call it FS, which will be the output of require FS. Then I'm going to create a couple of variables when we're going to store the names of these two files. So one variable I'm going to call Mars, where I'm going to store the path of the file Mars, and then another one, Venus, where I'm going to store the path of Venus. Okay, so first of all, let's check if this file exists. So we're going to be doing things the blocking way here. All right, so I'm going to use a method of FS called exists sync. So sync for synchronous. All right, and we are looking for Mars. So let's log the outputs of this function. And see what we get. So let's move to our folder. Okay, so and let's run app.js. And we're getting true, and that's because Mars does exist. Now, if you look for something else, if you look for a file called file.txt, for example, then you would get false. Okay, so that's how you check if a file exists using the blocking way or the synchronous way. Now let's read the contents of our file. So the method to use here is going to be read file sync, since we're doing it synchronously. So this will take a couple of parameters. So we're going to start with the name of our files, and then we're going to say that we're going to be reading our file using the UTF-8 encoding. All right, so you can store the outputs of this inside a file data, for example. So, and then you can log data. Or let's log something more readable, like Mars content, and then return, and then data. All right, so let's try and see. Here we go. So we get the contents of our file Mars. So if we check inside Mars, this is the content that we are getting. All right, I've got a line return there. That's why it's adding another line return. So if you try again, you won't see that. All right, so let's move to the next one. Let's create a file Jupyter. All right. So to do this, you need to use a method called write file sync. Okay, so write file or write file sync because we're doing it the synchronous way. So this method will take as a parameter the name of the file you'd like to create. So in our case, we want to create a file Jupyter, which is going to be jupyter.text. To make things tidy, I'm going to create another variable and I'm going to call it jupyter.text, or store jupyter.text inside this variable. So we can just use the variable like this. So if you do this and you pass another parameter or string to the method, then this is going to create a new file named jupyter.text, and it will place whatever content you write there inside your file. So let's write something like Jupiter has the shortest day of all planets. Okay, so let's try this. And now you can see that our file Jupyter has been created, and if we look inside it, you'll see the content that we have just added inside Jupyter. So the method write file, and we're using write file sync here to make it synchronous, will create a file if it does not exist, basically, and it will populate it with whatever content you place there. Now, if you try this same method on a file that exists already, then that file will be overwritten with whatever content you pass to the method. So if you try that on Venus, then you're going to lose the content of Venus and you will replace it with whatever you pass to the function. So let's try that. So first, let's read Jupiter the same way we read Mars. So let's use let instead of cont so that we can reuse our data variable. So we are reading Jupiter like that. Okay, so basically we are just overwriting Jupyter with this content because we had already created Jupyter. So let's do the same thing with Venus. And this time we're just overriding the content of Venus. And this time, let's just write, this is some text. And let's read Venus afterwards, like that. So let's try. So we can see the content of Jupiter first, and then we can see the content of Venus. It has changed, and now we get only that. We used to have a couple of lines there. Okay, so now let's append some content to Jupyter. So to append content, the method to use is called append file, like this. And we're going to add sync to make it synchronous. So we're going to pass the path of our file, and then let's just add some text. So I'm going to add line return followed by some text. Okay. So right after that, let's read the content or the new content of Jupyter. So let's go ahead and do this. So that's the new contents of Jupyter. So you got one more line. If you click on there, you can see the new content. Perfect. Now to double check that our code is actually blocking or synchronous, you can log something right at the end of the code, like logging hello, and you can see that this line is going to be printed after all that code has been executed. And this will prove that your code is actually blocking. Now, if you had some asynchronous code, then you would have this line executed probably first, because inside those lines, you had callbacks which were awaited to be executed. So it starts with that line first because it's ready, and then move to everything else once you get or you arrive to the callbacks. And that's something we're going to be covering later. All right, now if you do a quality check on this code, then you should find something that is not 100% correct. So your code like this would not pass a quality check. So I suggest you pause the video and try to find that. All right, so hopefully you managed to spot the issue. So to make things clear, what I'm going to do, I'm going to try to read a file, for example, that does not exist. So let's read file.txt and run this code like this. Well, we're getting an error because that file does not exist. So our code stops right there and none of these lines will be executed. So you will need to manage these errors by using a try-catch statement. So whenever you use a method like readFileSync, this method does not have a callback, meaning that if an error occurs, then there is no way to catch that error. So it's going to be your responsibility to catch that error and do whatever you like with that error. So we will need to wrap this code inside a try catch statement like this. So you try that code, and then if you catch an error, then you can do things like log the error, like this. And now let's wrap all the other ones inside try catch statements. All right. So if you are wondering how I do the formatting in the keyboard, so you just press Option Command in a Mac or Window or Control Alt on Windows, and that's how you do the formatting in brackets. All right, so now let's save. Now, if you try to read a file that does not exist, you get the error thrown like that, okay, and then your code carries on as normal. Alright, in the next video, you're going to work with the FS module using the asynchronous way using callback functions.